The screams echoed through the tier long before the officers arrived. An inmate had been cornered in the shower, blood mixing with the water that drained across the grimy tiles. For the men locked in their cells, this was not surprising. It was survival at Rikers Island, where every day felt like a test of whether you could make it to the next without breaking. Some called it the most notorious jail in America, others called it a place where time stood still. For those inside, it was both a battlefield and a waiting room, where danger lurked in the smallest moments. One former detainee later told a courtroom, "You either fight, or you get eaten alive." His words were not about a single attack but about the rhythm of life on the island. Violence was sudden, unpredictable, and often ignored until it was too late. Inmates spoke of days where fear became routine. At night, shouts carried down the halls, sometimes for help, sometimes threats, and sometimes the chilling silence after a fight was over, but the brutality was not only about physical danger. Rikers took something deeper from people, their sense of being human. Former detainees testified that food trays often came cold, sometimes spoiled. Medical requests could take days or even weeks, leaving sick inmates without care. In those long hours locked in cells, some men began talking to themselves, losing their grip on reality. Others carved messages into the paint of their cell walls, desperate to leave proof that they once existed. One man who later testified in federal court described the crushing loneliness. You could hear the city, the planes overhead, the traffic in the distance. But you couldn't touch it. You couldn't feel like you were alive anymore. He said the noise of New York was both comfort and torture, a reminder that freedom was close but unreachable. Still, there were moments of raw humanity, small victories in a place designed to strip them away. Inmates shared stories of borrowing books, of makeshift chess sets scratched into the concrete floor, of trading commissary food as though it were currency. These moments, though fragile, reminded them they were not yet broken. The struggle at Rikers wasn't just about other inmates, it was also about the system itself. Detainees often waited months, even years, for their trials. Many had not been convicted of a crime but were too poor to pay bail. To them, Rikers was punishment before punishment. They described the endless waiting as worse than the violence itself, because it eroded hope. Court dates were postponed, lawyers rotated, and each time they returned to their cells feeling less certain that the outside world would ever be theirs again. But the darkest truth came from those who admitted the toll it took on their minds. Some described the fear of not just dying inside, but living inside, living through endless days of confinement, of hearing about suicides, of watching others unravel until they no longer resembled the people who entered. As one detainee put it, the real fight at Rikers isn't just with others. It's with yourself. You fight to remember who you are. And then, one night, everything reached a breaking point. A lockdown was announced after a violent clash broke out between rival groups in one of the housing units. Doors slammed shut across the complex, leaving thousands of men trapped inside their cells as officers rushed to contain the chaos. The tension boiled into fear. No one knew if the violence would spill into their unit next. The silence after the alarms blared was suffocating, every inmate waiting, every officer on edge. The question on everyone's mind was simple but terrifying: who would survive the night? The lockdown stretched on through the night. Metal doors rattled as officers made their rounds, flashlights cutting across the dark cells. For the men inside, time slowed to a crawl. Some pressed their ears against the bars, trying to pick up whispers from the next tier. Others sat silently, too tense to move. The fear wasn't just about the fight that had sparked the lockdown, it was about what would come next. Retaliation was almost guaranteed, and everyone knew it. One former inmate later recalled in an interview, "You didn't sleep on nights like that. You just waited. You listened for footsteps, for shouts, for anything that told you if the violence was coming your way." By morning, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said an inmate had nearly been killed. Others claimed guards had been attacked. But what mattered most wasn't the truth, it was the uncertainty. In a place like Rikers, rumors had power. They could spark fear, shift alliances, or push men into fights they didn't want. Survival meant learning how to read those currents, to sense when to stay invisible and when to stand your ground. Life returned to its routine after the lockdown was lifted, but the tension lingered. Meals were slid through slots in the doors, sometimes edible, sometimes barely fit to eat. Breakfast was often cold cereal or bread, lunch was a sandwich with little meat, and dinner could be a tray of mystery stew. For some, commissary was the only escape, instant noodles, chips, candy bars. But not everyone could afford it, and that gap created another layer of danger. Debts over a bag of chips or a soup packet could turn deadly. Detainees described a strange rhythm to their days. Court dates would come and go, often postponed without warning. The bus ride to the courthouse was its own ordeal, hours in shackles, packed into crowded holding pens, only to be told the case was delayed. Returning to Rikers felt like being dragged back into the same nightmare, but with hope chipped away a little more each time. Mental health was another battle. Some men paced their cells for hours, unable to sit still. Others stared blankly at the walls, sinking into depression. There were stories of men screaming into the night, begging for medication or just someone to listen. Former inmates said the hardest part was watching others break down, knowing that the system was too overloaded to help. You saw people lose themselves, one man testified. You'd see them stop talking, stop eating, stop caring. And you wondered if you were next. Yet, even in that bleak environment, survival meant holding on to something, anything. Some clung to family phone calls, even if they lasted just a few minutes. Others found strength in routine, push-ups in the cell, reading old books, or scribbling letters they might never send. Inmates shared stories of friendships forged in whispers through vents, of advice passed between cells like lifelines, but danger never stayed away for long. Weeks after the first lockdown, another eruption shook one of the housing units. Two groups clashed over control of commissary items, and the fight spread fast. Officers flooded the tier, batons in hand, as alarms blared again. For inmates caught in the middle, there was no escape. Some pressed themselves against the walls, hoping not to be dragged in. Others had no choice but to fight back, defending themselves in chaos that felt more like a battlefield than a jail. As one officer later admitted in a report, by the time we got control, the floor was slick with blood. That night, after the second lockdown, one inmate whispered through the bars to another, "If you can make it through Rikers, you can make it anywhere." But the words weren't hopeful, they were a warning. Survival wasn't about strength alone. It was about endurance, patience, and a constant fight to hold on to your mind. And as the cells slammed shut again, the question remained, how many more would break before their time on the island was over?